took a 3-day-old baby and submerged its hand into a bucket of salted ice water to see how long it would take to freeze. In the room next door, a man was strapped to an operating table, chest open, organs being removed. He was still alive. Down the corridor, aircraft were being loaded with canisters packed with plague-infected fleas. Those aircraft were already scheduled to fly over Chinese cities before the week was out. Thousands of people had already died in those cities, as tests. The man who ran this place was a licensed physician named Shirou Ishii. His staff were doctors, scientists, university graduates. They kept meticulous records. They published findings. They went home at the end of the day. And when the war ended, every single one of them walked free. Because the United States government bought their research, paid for it, classified it, and spent the next 40 years making sure no one would ever find out. This is what they bought. And what happened to the company those men built afterward, a pharmaceutical corporation that would eventually infect hundreds of people with HIV, is something the history books still do not tell you. This is Unit 731, and you are going to want to stay until the end, because the part that should make you the angriest has nothing to do with World War II. Pingfang, Manchuria, 1936. 40 kilometers south of Harbin, a complex appeared in the countryside that the Imperial Japanese Army listed on its official maps as a lumber mill. The locals who live nearby noticed a few things that lumber mills do not usually have: 2 electrified perimeter fences, a private rail line, watchtowers, a chimney that ran night and day. Inside the fence, the prisoners wore no names, they wore numbers, 3 digits stamped on a tag hung around the neck. The personnel who worked there had a word for them: maruta, logs. The joke was built into the language. How many logs fell today was how you asked how many people had died in that morning's work. The facility was called Unit 731. Its commander was a lieutenant general named Shirou Ishii. And what Ishii was building inside those 2 electric fences was the most sophisticated biological weapons program in human history. Ishii was born in 1892 in Chiba Prefecture, 4th son of a sake maker, smart enough to get into Kyoto Imperial University's medical school, ambitious enough to spend 2 years, 1928 to 1930, touring Western biological research laboratories in Europe and the United States. He came back convinced of something that most military strategists had not yet understood: that the future of warfare was microscopic. Plague, cholera, anthrax, typhoid, dysentery, smallpox, tularemia, gas gangrene. He wanted to weaponize all of it. He wanted delivery systems. He wanted field tests. He wanted data. And he needed bodies to get it. By 1936 he had them. The Kempeitai, Japan's military secret police, fed prisoners into Pingfang at approximately 600 per year. Mostly Chinese, Soviet POWs, Korean laborers. Some were suspected spies, some were political prisoners. Some were poor men who had simply been in the wrong place when a Kempeitai sweep came through their village. Every single one of them was stripped of their name upon arrival, given a number, called a log, and not one of them walked out. A former Unit 731 member named Yoshio Shinozuka was 16 years old when he joined. He later confessed what he had witnessed in that facility. He described the first vivisection he attended. The prisoner had been infected with plague. He was strapped to an operating table. The surgeon made the first incision without anesthesia. Without anesthesia. The reasoning, Shinozuka was told, was that anesthesia would distort the tissue results. He said the prisoner made a sound he had never heard a human being make. They opened the chest, they opened the stomach, they removed organs and examined them while the man was still alive. Because the science required it. Because the data was more valuable than the person producing it. That was one morning in Pingfang. There were thousands of mornings in Pingfang. Dr. Yoshimura Hisato ran the frostbite program. A Kyoto physiologist, brilliant by every academic measure, Yoshimura wanted to understand how extreme cold damaged human tissue and what treatment worked best. A reasonable scientific question. The method he chose to answer it is the part that should be in every history book and somehow is not. He took prisoners outside in Manchurian winter, submerged their limbs in salted ice water, held them there until the tissue froze solid. Then he struck the frozen arm with a stick to test the sound it made. Former personnel described that sound as similar to hitting a plank of wood. His documented subjects included a 3-day-old infant. A needle was inserted into the baby's finger to prevent the hand from clenching closed. Yoshimura Hisato published his findings in Japanese medical journals after the war. In 1978, the Japanese government awarded him the Order of the Rising Sun 3rd Class for his contributions, and I am reading this directly, to the field of biological adaptation. The field of biological adaptation. He froze infants alive and they gave him a medal. The pathogen weapons were tested on real cities. October 1940, Ningbo, China. A Japanese aircraft made a low pass and released a cloud of plague-infected fleas over the city. An outbreak followed. This is the first confirmed aerial biological weapons attack in history, and most people reading about World War II have never heard of it. November 1941, Changde. Plague-infested grain and cotton dropped from the air. The Chinese government investigation counted 2,810 dead. Local records counted 7,643. The Zhejiang Jiangxi campaign. Cholera, anthrax, plague, typhoid released across an entire region. The operation was so thorough, so precise, that approximately 1,700 Japanese soldiers died from exposure to their own biological weapons. 1,700 of their own men. That number has always told me something about the scale of what they released. Historians estimate total deaths from Unit 731's field operations somewhere between 200,000 and 580,000. Those numbers vary depending on which records you use and which attacks you count. What does not vary is this. Every one of those people was killed deliberately, as a test, as data. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. 4 days before the announcement, Ishii's subordinate had already issued the order. Destroy everything. Documents burned, specimens disposed of. The incinerators at Pingfang ran continuously, and the approximately 300 prisoners still alive inside the facility were killed. Potassium cyanide. Some were shot. The method varied. The outcome did not. Ishii then faked his own death. He arranged a funeral in his home village in Chiba Prefecture, paid mourners, an obituary. He had calculated correctly that the Americans were coming. He was right. They came. But they did not come to arrest him. Lieutenant Colonel Murray Sanders arrived in Yokohama on August 30, 1945. 2 days before the formal surrender ceremony on the USS Missouri. His first contact in Japan was a man named Ryoichi Naito, Army Doctor, Unit 731 veteran, and Sanders' gateway into the entire network. Sanders interrogated Naito. He interrogated Masuda Tomosada. He wrote a report and sent it back to Fort Detrick, And then, by his own account, he recommended to General Douglas MacArthur that Naito and the other scientists receive immunity from war crimes prosecution. He recommended immunity before the tribunal had even begun. MacArthur sent a cable to Washington on May 6, 1947, cable number C52423. He recommended acquiring the biological warfare data in exchange for immunity. He described the strategic value. Washington agreed. On July 1, 1947, a memo circulated through the State War-Navy Coordinating Committee. Its conclusion? The value of Japanese biological warfare data was of such importance to national security as to far outweigh the value accruing from war crimes prosecution. They wrote it down, in a memo, in plain English, that the science produced by torturing and murdering thousands of people was worth more than holding anyone accountable. Then Edwin Hill submitted his December report with that sentence about scruples, about pittance, and the deal was done. The Tokyo Tribunal convicted 25 Japanese war criminals. 7 were executed. General Yoshijiro Umezu, who had commanded the Kwantung Army and signed the expansion orders for Unit 731, was convicted as a Class A war criminal and sentenced to life in prison. The scientists who ran the program, every one of them watched the tribunal from outside. Not one Unit 731 scientist was charged. Not one stood trial. The tribunal received no evidence about biological warfare because the US government had suppressed it. Only the Soviets prosecuted. In December 1949, the Soviet Union held a war crimes trial in Khabarovsk. 12 defendants. Kwantung Army veterans. The evidence was the Khabarovsk confessions, interrogation records from captured Japanese personnel. General Otozo Yamada received 25 years. The plague production chief, Major Karasawa Tomio, received 18. The United States government publicly called it Soviet propaganda. Sheldon Harris spent decades examining the evidence from both sides. He concluded the Khabarovsk trial was based on fact and not the fantasy of their handlers. All surviving defendants were repatriated to Japan by 1956. And now I want to tell you what happened to the scientists. Shirou Ishii spent his final years in Tokyo. He lectured at Fort Detrick at some point in the late 1940s, sharing the research that American Immunity had purchased. He died of throat cancer on October 9, 1959, at home. Yoshimura Hisato, the man with the frozen infants. He became chair of the Japan Meteorological Society in 1962, president of Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine from 1967 to 1969. He received his Order of the Rising Sun in 1978. He wrote a self-exculpatory autobiography in 1984. He died in 1990, at home. Masaji Kitano, Unit 731's second commanding officer, went into the blood business. In 1950, Kitano and Ryoichi Naito, the same Naito who had been Murray Sanders's first informant, the man whose immunity Sanders had personally recommended to MacArthur, co-founded the Japan Blood Bank. In 1964, the Japan Blood Bank renamed itself the Green Cross Corporation. In March 1983, the United States Food and Drug Administration approved a heat-treated Factor VIII blood concentrate. Heat treatment kills HIV. The technology was licensed. It was available. It worked. Green Cross told the Japanese Ministry of Health and Welfare that adopting heat-treated products would constitute unfair competition because Green Cross was not yet prepared to make heat-treated products itself. Japan continued distributing unheated blood clotting factor to haemophiliacs, to liver patients, to people who trusted the pharmaceutical system to protect them. By October 1997, 493 of those patients were dead from AIDS. The death toll would pass 500 before the end of the decade. On February 24, 2000, the Osaka District Court sentenced 3 Green Cross executives. Renzo Matsushita, 79 years old, received 2 years. Tadakazu Suyama, 72, received 18 months. Takehiko Kawano, 69, received 16 months. The company, founded by the men who ran Japan's biological weapons program, had infected Japanese citizens with a lethal virus through blood products they knew were dangerous. And the longest sentence anyone received was 2 years. 2 years. In August 2024, a 94-year-old man named Hideo Shimizu travelled to Harbin, China. He had joined Unit 731's Youth Corps in March 1945. He was 14 years old. He stood before the Apology and Peace Monument and bowed. He said, "I would like to express my sincere apologies and repentance to the Chinese victims, the victims of Unit 731 and the deceased." The museum's curator called him the only surviving member who is willing to expose the unit's crimes to the public. One man, 94 years old, out of 3,607 documented Unit 731 personnel whose names are now known. That is the only apology the victims of Unit 731 have ever received. Japan's government still maintains what researchers call the policy of 3 no's. No formal admission, no apology, no compensation. The Hill Report is still in the National Archives. The scruples sentence is still there. The mere pittance is still there. The cable MacArthur sent is still there. And somewhere in Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma's corporate history, the company that absorbed Green Cross in 2001, is a lineage that runs from a Manchurian lumber mill to a blood bank to a pharmaceutical provincial corporation that infected 500 people with HIV and called it a business decision. The logs kept falling. They just changed what they called them. If you want to know how governments decide that some lives are worth less than information, this story is the answer. It was never just Japan. It was never just 1947. The pattern does not change. Only the paperwork does.